Tonight we're heading back thousands of years, wandering into the dimly lit streets of Babylon just as the sun drops low and shadows lengthen across the dusty stones. Imagine the air heavy with the smell of baked clay, cooking fires, and river mud from the mighty Euphrates. Torches flicker along alleyways, merchants close their stalls, and somewhere in the distance a temple bell clanks in a slow, deliberate rhythm. You stand there with the crowd, caught between the fading day and the deep, unknown night. Time, though, you realize, slips through your fingers just as easily as the sand beneath your sandals. And in this ancient world, knowing the exact moment could mean the difference between making a sacrifice on time, being counted among workers, or, honestly, not angering some very short-tempered priest. You probably won't survive this era if you can't keep track of hours. Let's be honest. Running late here is more dangerous than ghosting someone's text in the 21st century. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk deeper into Babylon's bustling evening, stepping over discarded reed baskets and hearing the chatter of families huddled together for supper. Oil lamps glimmer through open doorways, the faint smell of lamb stew mixing with dust. Everywhere you look, there's movement, routine, a rhythm, but no wristwatches or neon numbers glowing in the dark. People sense time differently here. They rely on the world itself, the rising sun, the stretching shadows of ziggurats, the first visible stars. The city breathes on nature's pulse, but as you watch the lamps ignite one by one, you realize something important. The night is harder to measure. Without sunlight, the Babylonians are forced to improvise. Priests need to know when the gods expect offerings. Farmers want to know how long the night lasts before they can hit the fields again. Travelers need guidance, soldiers need shifts, rulers need ceremonies to start on time. And so, deep in the heart of this city, ingenious minds are already searching for new ways to grasp the ungraspable. You feel it as you walk past the temple steps, a hunger to master time itself. The gods may control fate, but humans are stubborn. They want a tool, something practical, something that drips, ticks, or flows, marking the hours with undeniable certainty. One mainstream fact you can't ignore: Babylon, around 1800 BCE, is already buzzing with record-keeping genius. Cuneiform tablets track everything from grain stores to planetary alignments. Of course, if they can catalogue the stars and the price of beer, you'd better believe they're going to tackle time. And here's a quirky tidbit: while you imagine solemn priests scribbling mathematical equations, sometimes it was just everyday people carving crude marks into clay or using household bowls filled with water. Not every innovation is born in a royal lab. Sometimes it starts when a curious farmer thinks, what if I let this pot drip all night and see how long it takes? Humanity's greatest leaps often begin with someone slightly bored. Historians still argue whether Babylon was truly the first to invent the water clock, or if Egypt beat them to it. The evidence points in multiple directions, and scholars bicker over which fragments of clay actually count as clocks. You might chuckle at their debates. It's like arguing who invented pizza first, when the real question is, who gets credit for making it delicious? As you linger in the marketplace, you hear the gossip of traders. Someone claims there's a clever way to track hours without sun or stars. Another whispers about bowls that drip water steadily through a tiny hole at the base. The rhythm of those drops, they say, might hold the secret. It sounds like sorcery, but it's really just physics, wrapped in clay and patience. You picture it, a simple bowl filled with water, set on a flat surface, slowly trickling into another container below. Each drop marks a moment. Count the drops, and you count the hours. Primitive? Yes. Effective? Sometimes. Perfect? Definitely not. But it's a start. Walking further, you sense that this craving for measurement isn't just practical, it's spiritual. Time isn't a casual thing here. It's sacred. The gods demand precision, and humans scramble to deliver it. If the sacrifice is late, is it still valid? If the stars are charted at the wrong moment, does fate itself bend? These are the kinds of questions that keep priests awake at night. Well, that and the anxiety of dripping bowls that run dry too quickly. As you rest against a mud brick wall, you realize that Babylon at dusk is more than a city. It's a giant organism, pulsing, breathing, demanding structure. Every chant, every trade, every march of soldiers needs coordination. Without a clock, it's chaos. And the Babylonians, practical dreamers that they are, won't settle for chaos. They carve order out of clay, turning dripping water into something more than sound. It becomes a heartbeat, a promise that night can be sliced into equal, predictable parts. The next time you glance at your phone clock and complain about it being 2 minutes fast, remember the Babylonians. Their clock might have been just a wobbly clay bowl with a hole in it, dripping like an impatient faucet. Yet here they are, carving the foundation of how humanity tracks the hours. And honestly, you'd be late for school, or temple duty, either way. You step out from the temple courtyard and wander toward an open square, the city quieting as torches flicker higher against the encroaching night. The first stars glint above you, pale sparks that ancient Babylonians once trusted more than any clock or calendar. They tilt their faces to the heavens the way you tilt your head toward a phone screen. For them, time begins in the sky. Imagine watching the sun drag its golden arc across the horizon, the shadows of ziggurats stretching like long dark fingers until finally vanishing in the twilight. That was their first, most obvious clock, the sun, rising and falling without fail. But the problem is clear. The sun doesn't shine at night, and cloudy days erase its precise lines. You can't measure a midnight ritual or a late harvest watch by staring into darkness. So you notice them turning to the next best thing, stars. The Babylonians were obsessive stargazers, cataloging constellations, plotting planets, and predicting eclipses with uncanny precision. Whole clay tablets preserve their nightly logs. And with those stars came a rhythm. Certain constellations rose at predictable times in certain seasons. If Orion climbed above the horizon, you knew roughly what hour it was. Not perfect, but better than stumbling blind. One mainstream fact that anchors this: Babylonian priests tracked the heliacal rising of Venus the moment it appears just before sunrise, because it held not only astrological significance but also timing for seasonal duties. They didn't just map the heavens for fun, their entire agricultural and ritual calendars were stitched into those lights above. Of course, not everything about this celestial timekeeping was so serious. A quirky tidbit: some scholars think ordinary people sometimes nicknamed constellations after animals or daily tools. One grouping resembled a plow, another a scorpion, practical, vivid imagery that made night sky conversations less intimidating. Imagine two farmers arguing, "No, that's not a lion, that's clearly a shovel." Stargazing arguments may be the oldest form of nerd fight. But here's where debate still rattles history classrooms. Historians still argue whether ordinary Babylonians truly read the sky for practical scheduling, or whether it remained mostly in the hands of temple elites. Was Grandma actually checking Cassiopeia to know when to pull bread from the oven, or was that just priests hoarding cosmic secrets? No one can quite agree. As you keep walking through Babylon's night, the tension between reliance on celestial bodies and the demands of daily life becomes obvious. Watching shadows or stars requires a clear view, patience, and a mental calendar. But when you're a soldier pulling guard duty, or a cook timing a feast, or a priest needing midnight sacrifices to land at exactly the right hour, vague constellations won't cut it. You need something tangible. You pause by a wall, hearing two voices murmur about it. The sun tells us when to rise, but what tells us when the night is half gone? One asks. The gods, the other shrugs. Which, in Babylonian terms, is both a spiritual truth and a practical problem. You smile at the thought. It's like asking your phone for the time and hearing it say, "Just trust destiny." Not helpful when you've got temple chores. Think about shadows, too. Sundials were already in some form here, sticks in the ground marking the arc of the day. You can almost see a child pointing at the shifting shade of a palm tree, declaring it lunchtime. But again, shadows vanish at dusk. If you're waiting on a lover after sunset, you're out of luck. And no, you can't just say, "Meet me at 8. That number doesn't exist yet. Instead, you feel the beginnings of frustration pressing in on the city. The celestial world works, but it's distant, unreliable for the messy details of human life. And it is in that gap, between the glorious certainty of stars and the chaos of earthly routine, that something new will be born. There's also something poetic about it. The Babylonians' new time was slippery, divine, maybe even dangerous. The sun blazed, the stars glimmered, but humans longed for something in their hands, right here in the dust. Water, as it turns out, would answer. Flowing, dripping, unstoppable, like time itself. But for now, you're still under the stars, the moon hanging faintly, silvering the rooftops. A woman balances a jug on her head, water sloshing as she walks. The sound of it catches your ear, the soft rhythm of liquid shifting with every step. Without realizing it, you're listening to the first hint of a new kind of timepiece, one that doesn't depend on skies at all. And isn't that fitting? The Babylonians looked up, but in the end, they would find their most enduring measure not in the heavens, but in a simple drop of water falling from clay. You follow the sound of sloshing water down a narrow alley, where families gather around jars, filling them from buckets carried up from the river. The Euphrates flows dark and wide just beyond the city walls, its surface shimmering under moonlight. Here, in the most ordinary act, pouring water into clay, you sense the seed of an idea forming. The Babylonians already watched the sun and stars, but now someone has realized, maybe time can be measured by the way water itself behaves. Picture it, you're crouched beside a clay pot. You fill it with water to the brim. Slowly, steadily, the water drips out of a tiny hole at the base, drop after drop, falling into another vessel. Each drop is a moment. The steady dripping becomes a rhythm as sure as a heartbeat. For the first time in history, humans hold a way to mark hours not by what the sky tells them, but by a tool they've built with their own hands. This is the birth of the water clock. It feels almost too simple, like the kind of invention that hides in plain sight for centuries before someone goes, "Wait, why don't we just let the water drip?" It's the same energy as realizing you can microwave leftovers in the container you stored them in. Obvious once you've seen it, genius before. Here's the mainstream fact. By the 2nd millennium BCE, Babylonians were using clepsydras, literally water stealers, to track hours, especially during the night. Clay bowls with carefully carved holes allowed water to escape at a predictable rate, dividing time into measurable chunks. These early devices may have been crude, but they represented a massive leap, time itself captured in a vessel. And a quirky tidbit to sprinkle in, some researchers believe the earliest water clocks weren't even bowls with holes, but rather containers where water was poured in instead of dripping out. As the level rose, lines inside the bowl indicated the passage of time. Imagine staring at your mug of tea, not to drink it, but to see how far the liquid climbs, basically a caffeinated timepiece. Of course, historians still argue whether Babylon truly birthed this idea or if the Egyptians got there first. Fragments of Egyptian stone vessels with markings suggest water clocks existed on the Nile around the same era. So, was Babylon the original innovator or just part of a larger, messy timeline of dripping experiments? Scholars haven't settled the debate, but that's half the fun. History isn't a neat row of checkmarks. It's more like your messy desk drawer full of half-used batteries and mystery cables. Still, There's something uniquely Babylonian about how the idea takes root here. You glance around the city, jars of water line every doorway, canals snake through streets. The very lifeblood of the city depends on irrigation and careful water management. These are people who already treat water as divine and essential. It only makes sense that they'd notice its steady flow and think, if we can guide rivers, maybe we can guide time. As you walk through the night streets, you hear a priest instructing an apprentice. Mark the level when the chant begins, then again when it ends. If the bowl empties too quickly, patch the hole smaller. If it runs too slow, widen it. Trial and error, messy yet persistent. It's strangely comforting, like watching someone fiddle endlessly with their Wi-Fi router until it finally connects. There's another layer to all this, the sacredness of the act. In Babylonian thought, time wasn't just hours, it was divine order. By harnessing water to measure moments, they weren't simply making a practical tool, they were brushing against cosmic forces. The drip wasn't just sound, it was destiny marking its beat. You feel the hush of reverence in the temple as the first drops fall into the empty jar, priests leaning in as though hearing the whisper of gods. But outside the temples, the invention creeps into daily life. Imagine a merchant setting a dripping bowl to know when to pack up for the day, or a baker timing how long his bread should rise. The practicality spreads quickly, because once someone invents a way to tame the chaos of hours, everyone wants in. Of course, it doesn't always go smoothly. Clay cracks, holes clog, water drips faster when the jug is fuller, slower as it empties. The earliest inventors must have cursed more than once when their perfect clock betrayed them halfway through the night. Yet the concept was too powerful to abandon. Like the first person who tried to bake bread and ended up with charcoal bricks, you just keep trying until it works. You lean against the temple wall, listening to that rhythmic plink, 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 and you realize you're hearing the start of something monumental. This isn't just about clay bowls and dripping water. This is humanity's first step toward living by mechanical rhythms, toward building lives around measurable, reliable units of time. Without this step, no sundials, no sandglasses, no tower bells, no ticking watches, no glowing phone screens telling you it's way past bedtime right now. It all starts here, with a Babylonian potter, some water, and an idea so simple it could have slipped right through history's fingers if not for the persistence of a few curious minds. You step closer to the workshop where clay is being kneaded, spun, and fired. The air smells of dust, smoke, and baked earth, and your ears fill with the gritty scrape of tools against wet pottery. Here, among jars and bowls meant for cooking, storing, and offering, the Babylonians craft their earliest water clocks. No ornate gears, no polished brass, just simple clay bowls, fragile yet revolutionary. You crouch to see one more clearly. The potter's hands are quick and practiced, smoothing the walls of a small, round vessel. Once fired, the bowl will hold water, but the trick is what comes next. A pin or reed punches a tiny hole at the base, so small it looks like an accident at first. Yet through that pinprick, water will drip in a steady rhythm. You lean closer, and soon the hypnotic plink, plink, plink fills the room. Mainstream fact incoming: these early clepsydras weren't just random bowls. Some were carefully inscribed with markings inside or outside, so the water's level could be read as it fell. Archaeologists have found examples showing calibrated lines, proof that Babylonians weren't leaving things to guesswork, they were engineering consistency. And here's a quirky tidbit: some bowls weren't plain at all. A few were decorated with little carved fish or waves, almost as if to joke, yes, this bowl holds both time and water. Imagine turning your kitchen colander into a clock and still finding a way to make it fashionable. Even timekeeping had style points. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians fully mastered a uniform drip rate. Physics is tricky. When a bowl is full, the pressure makes water flow faster. when it's nearly empty, the trickle slows. Did they compensate with carefully shaped holes, or did they just shrug and accept the inconsistency? Scholars debate this endlessly, like a never-ending Reddit thread about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. You hear an apprentice grumble. The bowl he made empties in half the time expected, leaving the priest frowning at his misaligned ritual schedule. The master potter smacks him lightly with a reed stick and orders him to try again. Accuracy isn't optional when you're dealing with temple ceremonies. It's not just a bad clock, it's potentially an insult to the gods. You picture it, a sacrifice arriving too late because the water ran out early. Awkward doesn't even begin to cover it. And yet, as flawed as these bowls might be, they transform the city. Priests can measure the hours of the night, officials can time legal speeches, even guards can rotate shifts more fairly. You realize you're watching the invention of scheduling, the backbone of civilization. Without it, meetings, prayers, and court cases would still be a chaotic mess of whenever. The sensory side of this moment is impossible to ignore. Imagine lying in the temple courtyard, the stars overhead, while beside you the steady drip echoes through the night. It's like a Babylonian version of white noise. You'd almost fall asleep to it until someone shouts, "Wait, did it already empty?" There's something almost comical about how fragile the system is. A single grain of dust blocking the hole ruins the measurement. A rat nibbling at the bowl means time itself collapses. And heaven help you if someone tips it over by accident. The earliest water clocks demanded constant babysitting, which is oddly comforting. It makes you realize even the ancients had the equivalent of technical difficulties. Still, you can't help admiring the genius at play. These aren't mathematicians in ivory towers, they're craftspeople with muddy hands, solving cosmic problems with whatever tools they have. The potter's wheel spins, the kiln roars, and yet what they're making is more than pottery. They're making hours, moments, the rhythm of an empire. As you watch the apprentices line up finished bowls, you can almost hear the ripple effect. From this dusty room will spread centuries of inventions, Greek refinements, Roman adaptations, Islamic astronomers perfecting them, medieval monasteries adapting them for prayer bells. But here in Babylon, it's just clay, water, and persistence. The workshop quiets as night deepens, save for the sound of dripping. You close your eyes, listening, and the rhythm seems to merge with your heartbeat. For a moment, you feel what the Babylonians must have felt, time no longer something distant in the heavens, but something you can hold in your hands, fragile as fired clay. You slip out of the workshop and drift toward the temple grounds, where torches burn low and the murmur of chanting hums in the air. The smell of incense, sharp, resinous, hangs heavy as priests in long robes move slowly across the courtyard. Here is where the dripping bowls find their most sacred purpose, measuring the hours of the night so that rituals unfold exactly as prescribed. The temple looms above you, its stairways broad and steep, leading to altars that must be tended at precise intervals. Sacrifices, hymns, and offerings can't be delivered whenever, they must fall at the appointed moment, aligned with the god's will. Without a sun to guide them, the priests lean on their water clocks. You watch as one sets a bowl carefully on a flat stone, fills it with water, and whispers a short prayer before letting the first drip fall. That sound, plink, signals the beginning of an hour. Mainstream fact: Babylonian priests often used clepsydras to keep vigil through the night, making sure prayers and sacrifices occurred at exact intervals. Ancient texts even mention rituals divided into watches, sections of the night marked and measured by timepieces like these. The water clock gave them structure when stars or shadows weren't enough. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that during big festivals, extra attendants were assigned just to sit by the water clock all night, topping it off when needed and making sure nothing interfered. Imagine that your entire job is to babysit a dripping bowl of water. It's basically the ancient version of being told, "Hold my spot in line," except the line is time itself. Historians still argue whether these temple clocks were truly reliable enough to coordinate such sacred rituals, or whether priests sometimes fudged things, pretending the gods got their offering at the right moment even if the bowl betrayed them. Did faith bend to the clock, or did the clock bow to faith? No one can say for certain, but the tension hangs thick, even in the air you're breathing now. You edge closer to watch. A priest hums a low chant while the water drains. When the level drops to a mark scratched on the bowl's inside, he signals another attendant to bring incense to the altar. The whole temple moves in rhythm with this dripping. It feels almost mechanical, though no gears or springs exist yet. The god isn't watching the stars tonight. The god listens to the drip of water. Think about the atmosphere, the courtyard lit by oil lamps, the distant stars invisible behind drifting smoke, the steady rhythm of drops hitting clay below. If you let your eyes close, you'd swear you were in some kind of cosmic meditation. It's calming until you imagine the stress of being responsible for keeping the gods happy with nothing but a hole in a pot. One wrong measurement and, well, you'd hope divine wrath has a snooze button. You wander around the temple edges and find another use: timing oracles. Priests sometimes waited for omens, like smoke rising in a certain pattern or an animal behaving strangely. The water clock marked how long they observed before declaring, "This is the god's answer." The longer the drip lasted, the weightier the omen. So, in a sense, Babylonian destiny itself ticked along with the falling drops. There's even a practical side tucked in here. Festivals could last all night, and priests needed to switch shifts. Water clocks let them rotate duties without fights, each watch marked by a bowlful. You can almost hear one priest groaning, "Ooh, I just had to get the 3 a.m. watch again." Turns out, complaining about night shifts is at least 4,000 years old. The water clock isn't flawless, though. A gust of wind, a careless bump, even uneven clay walls could ruin accuracy. That's why attendants stood guard, eyes sharp, ears tuned to every drip. Imagine having to stare at water draining for hours, convincing yourself it's exciting because divine order depends on it. That's dedication, or maybe just ancient insomnia. Still, standing in this courtyard, you can feel how revolutionary it must have been. Before, night was a vague expanse, you prayed when you thought it felt right. Now, it was divided, sliced neatly by a bowl and a drip. It gave structure, predictability, confidence. For the priests, it must have felt like pulling the divine down into clay, harnessing heaven with a trick of earth and water. You look around one last time, the torches flickering low, the chants echoing against stone, and the drip marking the slow crawl of hours. Babylon isn't just watching the sky anymore. It's holding time in its hands, and here in the temple, every drop is sacred. From the temple you wander into the sprawling palace complex, where stone courtyards open wide and scribes hunch under flickering lamps. The atmosphere here feels different, less incense and chanting, more bustle and paperwork. Time in the palace isn't about appeasing gods, it's about keeping humans in line. Judges, officials, scribes, and guards all need schedules, and once again the humble water clock becomes the silent boss ticking behind the scenes. You pause at the edge of a chamber where a judge sits in a high-backed chair, a clay tablet balanced on his knees. Before him, two citizens argue over a land dispute, voices rising like sparrows fighting in the dust. In the corner sits a water bowl, dripping steadily. A young assistant watches the level carefully. Each time the water drains to a marked line, the assistant scratches a sign into wax. The judge has decreed that each speaker gets one measure of water for their argument. When the bowl empties, the speaker has to shut up, no exceptions. Mainstream fact: Babylonian courts often used timed speeches. Ancient legal documents hint at restrictions on how long someone could present their case, and scholars suspect clepsydras helped enforce this. The water ensured fairness, preventing one loudmouth from dominating the session until everyone else collapsed from boredom. Quirky tidbit. Some stories suggest clever defendants tried to mess with the water clock, like sneaking in thicker clay bowls that slowed the drip, or even breathing over the hole to change the flow. Imagine being so desperate in court that you lean over the evidence and literally blow on time. If true, it's the oldest case of gaming the system. Historians still argue whether these courtroom water clocks were widespread or just an occasional curiosity. Some believe they were reserved for elite cases, while others think even petty disputes in small towns might have been timed this way. Without more tablets, the debate bubbles on, ironically, without a clock to stop it. You drift deeper into the palace, where scribes scratch lists of rations and tax payments. Here, too, the water clock finds its place. Officials schedule shifts for guards, hours for scribes, times for audience with the king. Suddenly you see how this tiny invention spills beyond temples into the machinery of government. A palace without time is like a modern office without calendars, chaotic, endless, full of excuses. The water bowl keeps everyone moving, whether they like it or not. You overhear a scribe muttering, "Too short. My watch felt shorter than his." A guard answers dryly, "The bowl doesn't lie." But of course, it does, just a little. The drip isn't perfect, the clay isn't exact, and sometimes fair is really just close enough. Still, compared to guessing by shadows, it feels like progress. Picture it, inside these walls, decisions about taxes, armies, and trade hinge on meetings that must start and end on time. The king won't sit around waiting because someone lost track of the stars. With the water clock, excuses vanish. If you're late, it's your fault, not the cosmos. In a way, the clock doesn't just measure time, it creates discipline, authority, accountability. The palace itself becomes a rhythm machine. Guards change shifts on the drip. Messengers hurry out when the water hits a line. Even kitchen staff, preparing feasts, glance nervously at bowls to know when to carry dishes. You might laugh, thinking of an ancient cook whispering, "The lamb needs 3 bowls to roast." But really, it works. There's also humor tucked in. One official complains his bowl ran out too quickly, cutting his meeting short. Another grins slyly and says, "The gods clearly wanted you to finish." Jokes like this ripple through the palace, proof that even in ancient bureaucracy, timekeeping was both tool and punchline. And as you lean against the wall, you realize something striking. Babylon is beginning to run not just on sun and stars, but on measured hours. From the temple to the throne room, life is being sliced into pieces of equal length. The city beats with a rhythm not unlike your own clock back home, though here the sound isn't ticking, it's dripping. The bowl in the corner empties again, another speech cut off, another judgment passed. You hear the echoes of order spreading outward, into laws, routines, fairness, and authority. The water clock isn't just a quirky gadget anymore. It's the heartbeat of justice, the pulse of government, the quiet but relentless reminder that even kings and priests are bound, in the end, by time. You leave the palace and wander out toward the high terraces where the night air is sharp and cool. Here, the mood shifts again. You're no longer in courts or kitchens but among stargazers, men wrapped in robes who tilt their heads toward the heavens with the seriousness of surgeons. Their tablets are etched with symbols of stars, their hands inked with calculations. And beside them, quietly dripping in the shadows, sit bowls of water. The Babylonians weren't just casual skywatchers, they were astronomers before the word even existed. They charted the motions of Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and recorded eclipses with eerie accuracy. But the stars move slowly, you can't always measure their changes in a single night. That's where the water clock comes in. By combining the drip of water with the positions of the stars, they could map both the short beat of hours and the grand sweep of seasons. Mainstream fact: Babylonian astronomers used clepsydras in observatories to track intervals between celestial events. A star's rising might take place exactly 3 water measures after another disappeared. Those records eventually helped them predict phenomena like eclipses, giving Babylon its reputation as a center of cosmic knowledge. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some sources hint that these star watchers gave nicknames to their water clocks, almost like pets. One bowl might be called the Night Singer because its dripping echoed in the still air. Imagine naming your kitchen timer Bob and then yelling, "Bob's empty, the eclipse is here." Not exactly lab standard, but it makes the work more human. Historians still argue whether these astronomers could truly achieve precise astronomical measurements with such crude devices. Could a dripping pot really time the interval of a lunar eclipse down to useful accuracy? Some say yes, pointing to their detailed predictions. Others shrug and suggest they must have smoothed over errors when recording. The debate drips on, just like the bowls. You step closer to one astronomer. He kneels by his clepsydra, refilling it as he squints at the horizon. A faint line of stars rises, and he murmurs to a colleague, 2 measures since Venus appeared. He scratches the number onto a clay tablet. You realize this isn't just timekeeping anymore. It's data collection, raw, systematic, and obsessive. The combination of dripping water and glimmering stars becomes the backbone of science itself. The setting around you is breathtaking. High terraces overlooking the city, the Euphrates glimmering far below, the ziggurat looming like a stairway to the heavens. Lamps flicker in the astronomers' alcoves, their shadows stretching across walls painted with constellations. Every so often, a priest coughs softly, the sound blending with the plink of water drops. Together, it feels like the pulse of the cosmos itself. There's a sense of tension here, too. The astronomers aren't just scientists, they're priests as well, diviners whose observations will dictate royal decisions. If the stars align badly, wars are postponed. If Venus rises at the wrong hour, harvest rituals shift. Imagine being the poor guy whose water bowl leaks too fast, skewing the prediction. That's not just embarrassment, it's potential catastrophe. But in their quiet way, these men are inventing something profound. By blending dripping water with the eternal heavens, they're building a bridge between human life and cosmic order. For the first time, timekeeping is more than practical, it's philosophical. Each drop isn't just a second lost, it's a piece of eternity measured out in clay. You catch yourself chuckling softly. Somewhere, one astronomer scratches his head, realizing his bowl ran dry too soon. His colleague teases him, the gods clearly wanted the eclipse early. Even here, at the edge of science, humor slips through. After all, if you can't laugh at a leaky pot, what kind of astronomer are you? As you stand beneath the wide Mesopotamian sky, the air thick with stars, you realize that Babylon has woven a new kind of fabric. Time is no longer just for cooking meals or timing court speeches. It's for understanding the universe itself. And with every drip of water, the city takes another step toward science, calendars, prediction, toward the very way we still mark our lives today. From the lofty terraces of astronomers, you wander back down into the hum of ordinary life, where people aren't staring at Jupiter's path but just trying to get through the day without burning bread or missing a shift. Babylon might have been a center of cosmic study, but beneath the ziggurats, water clocks crept into kitchens, gardens, and workshops. Suddenly, the invention that once timed sacrifices and eclipses becomes a companion for chores. You pass through a narrow lane lined with reed mats and clay ovens glowing in the dusk. The smell of bread hits your nose, thick, nutty, with just a hint of char. A baker wipes sweat from his forehead as he sets dough near the heat. On the counter beside him sits a small clay bowl with a pinhole, dripping into another container. He mutters, "Half a bowl until the crust is done." That's his timer. Forget buzzing kitchen gadgets, this is Babylon's version of a cooking alarm. Mainstream fact, water clocks eventually extended beyond temples and palaces, finding their way into everyday activities like timing baking, brewing, or irrigation schedules. While elite versions might be decorated or calibrated, simpler bowls served common households too. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Babylonian farmers may have used water clocks to regulate irrigation canals, letting the flow run for one measure of water before switching gates. It's basically the ancient version of setting a sprinkler timer, except instead of electronics, it's a dripping bowl in the mud. Imagine complaining to your neighbor, "Sorry, my barley drowned, my clock leaked again." Historians still argue whether water clocks were genuinely common in homes or if most people just guessed the hours by sun and instinct. Clay bowls are fragile, and only a few survive, so scholars debate whether ordinary farmers actually owned them or if this is romantic speculation. You can almost hear two experts bickering. Every peasant had one. No way, they were for elites only. And somewhere in the middle, a Babylonian baker shrugs, using whatever works. You wander past a courtyard where women spin wool. One glances at the water clock to know when to switch tasks, humming softly as the drip echoes. In a garden nearby, a child splashes her hand in the drip bowl, giggling until her mother swats her away. "That's not play, it's time," she scolds, as if the bowl were sacred even outside the temple. The sounds of the market reach you next: traders haggling, goats bleating, the slap of sandals on stone. A merchant gestures toward his dripping bowl, telling a customer, "By the time this empties, I'll fetch your goods." It becomes a unit of promise, a casual contract measured not in minutes but in water. You chuckle, it's like saying, "Give me one Netflix episode and I'll be back." In the workshops, craftsmen experiment, some carving marks on the sides to divide the bowl into smaller hours. The drip gives rhythm to the banging of hammers and the weaving of reeds. Slowly, Babylon's daily routine begins to tick, not in ticks at all, but in soft drips. You imagine how strange it must have felt. For generations, people judged time by the sun's heat, the rooster's call, or the ache in their stomachs. Now, a clay pot insists on a different kind of order, one that doesn't care how you feel. The bread isn't ready because you're hungry, it's ready when the water says so. For the first time, ordinary people are learning to live by measured intervals rather than instinct. Still, problems abound. A gust of wind splashes water out. Kids tip bowls over while playing. Someone forgets to refill it, and suddenly bread time becomes burnt bread time. The invention works, but only with constant attention. Which is oddly relatable. Think about how often your phone dies right when you need it. Technology always demands babysitting. And yet, you sense the quiet power of it. In gardens, kitchens, and markets, Babylon hums with a new beat. Chores become predictable, trade becomes fairer, and even children begin to learn the rhythm of measured time. It's subtle, but it's transforming the city just as much as the priests chanting in the temples. You glance back at the baker, pulling loaves from the oven just as his bowl empties. He grins proudly, as if he's cracked the code of the cosmos. And in a way, he has. Out here in the everyday, the dripping bowl becomes not just a sacred tool, but a household rhythm maker, the quiet soundtrack of Babylonian life. You leave the market behind and follow the sound of laughter coming from a tavern tucked between mud brick walls. The air inside is thick with the scent of beer and roasted onions, voices rising in argument and amusement. Here, the water clock isn't treated as sacred or scientific, it's just another tool, and sometimes, another excuse. You spot a group of men hunched over a clay bowl on the table. It's dripping slowly, marking time for their drinking game. One boasts he can drain his mug before the bowl empties. Another claims he'll last 2 measures without stumbling. The bowl becomes both scorekeeper and referee. Except halfway through, the drip sputters, clogged by a fleck of mud. The crowd bursts out laughing as one man protests. "Not fair. Time cheated me." Mainstream fact: ancient water clocks were notoriously finicky. Changes in water temperature, sediment from rivers, or even the shape of the hole could cause uneven flow, making them less reliable than later sundials or mechanical clocks. Accuracy was always at risk, which is why priests and astronomers often stationed attendants to watch them. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some early texts hint at people deliberately tampering with water clocks, blocking the hole with wax, carving it wider with a reed, or even tilting the bowl slightly. It's like the world's first time hack. Instead of speeding up a classroom clock so school ends early, you just tilt your bowl and declare, "Look, shift's over." Historians still argue whether Babylonian society tolerated these adjustments or punished them harshly. Was messing with a clock seen as playful mischief, or as a serious offense against divine order? The debate hasn't settled, though you suspect ordinary people probably saw it as a clever trick until a priest caught them. You wander into a courtyard where two farmers shout over a missed appointment. One swears his clock ran too fast, the other claims it ran too slow. Both wave their arms like kids fighting over whose turn it is on the swing. In a world without wristwatches, lateness is always someone's fault, and my bowl leaked quickly becomes the Babylonian version of my alarm didn't go off. There's comedy in it, but also tension. Imagine being a palace guard due to switch posts at the third measure, only for your partner to arrive late, insisting the bowl wasn't empty yet. You'd glare at him, sweaty and exhausted, muttering, "Sure, blame the water." Human squabbles over punctuality stretch back as far as the invention of time itself. You pause beside a household where a woman sighs in frustration. Her bread overbaked because her son kicked the drip bowl while chasing a goat. Across the alley, a potter complains his apprentice poked too big a hole, making a clock that raced like a rabbit. Everywhere you turn, water clocks betray their owners, and yet no one throws them out. Because despite the flaws, they're still better than nothing. Picture yourself lying awake at night, listening to the drip in the corner. Sometimes it's soothing, steady, lulling you to sleep. Other times, the sound is maddening because you know the rhythm is off. Too fast, too slow, unpredictable. You'd almost prefer silence, but then how would you know when to wake the priests for their next watch? And that's the paradox. These devices create order but also spark new kinds of chaos. People argue, cheat, laugh, and blame each other for their bowl's failures. The water clock isn't just a neutral machine, it's a social catalyst, sparking disputes as much as it solves them. You can't help smiling at the irony. Here in Babylon, time itself leaks, sputters, and betrays expectations. And yet people cling to it, convinced they're taming the hours with clay and water. It's endearing, in a way. You've probably cursed your phone for dying at 2%, or your oven timer for not beeping loud enough. Turns out, that frustration has a 4,000-year-old history. The tavern behind you erupts in laughter again as another man claims the gods must have clogged the drip to rob him of victory. You shake your head, amused. In Babylon, excuses flow as easily as water, and time, just like beer, is always running out faster than you want. You drift away from the tavern and return to the quiet edges of the city, where shadows stretch across worn stone streets and the smell of evening fires mixes with river mud. Here, the water clock starts to take on another role, not just practical or social, but symbolic, mythic. It's no longer merely a tool for baking, trading, or keeping night vigils. Instead, it embodies the flow of life itself, the cosmic order the Babylonians so desperately sought to honor. Walk past a temple mural depicting gods and rivers. You notice the flowing lines of water intertwining with the divine figures. The Babylonians seemed to believe that water, ever moving, represented both the passage of time and the will of the gods. Every drop that fell from a clay pot echoed the eternal rhythm of creation and decay. Drip by drip, the universe itself was being measured. Mainstream fact: in Mesopotamian cosmology, Flowing water was often linked to order, fertility, and divine authority. The Tigris and Euphrates were not merely rivers, they were sacred arteries, life-giving and symbolic. So it makes sense that a technological invention involving water would carry religious weight. Water clocks became not just measurement devices but also reminders of cosmic balance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some small Babylonian bowls bore etched inscriptions of mythical creatures, like fish-headed men or tiny dragons, along the side. These markings were believed to imbue the clock with divine oversight. In other words, the water wasn't just dripping, it was being watched by spirits. Imagine an office clock today with little emoji guardians whispering, "Don't be late." Historians still argue whether all this symbolism was truly central or if it was mainly an overlay applied by priests to otherwise mundane objects. Did ordinary citizens see the bowls as sacred, or was that reserved for temple versions? Evidence is fragmentary, and scholars debate passionately, like a Twitter thread about whether a movie's ending really makes sense. As you wander past a shrine, you overhear a priest explaining the moral significance of flowing water. Time is like the river, it moves unceasingly. Respect it, and you respect the gods. The sentiment is simple, yet profound. You sense that the water clock becomes a bridge between the ephemeral human schedule and the eternal rhythms of the cosmos. Back in a courtyard, a young apprentice runs a hand along the grooves of a clepsydra. He smiles at the tiny fish carved into the side, as if they are companions in his vigil. The dripping sound merges with the wind, the distant chatter, and the low hum of temple life. It's almost musical. And in a strange way, the act of watching water fall connects him to something much larger than himself. Consider how this echoes in myths. Flowing water often represents not just life, but knowledge, fate, and destiny. The Babylonians might have seen the clepsydra as a microcosm of the universe itself. One small vessel captures infinite ideas, order, mortality, justice, and the relentless march of moments. Of course, practical jokes and accidents still abound. Some apprentices reportedly flipped bowls, dropped jugs, or misread the markings, causing minor chaos in ritual timing. Yet even these mistakes were absorbed into the story, a reminder that the divine and the human always intertwine, imperfectly. Walking further, you spot murals depicting mythic narratives alongside what look like bowls of water. The images suggest that time, in its flowing, dripping form, is inseparable from stories of gods, kings, and heroes. The symbolism is pervasive. Time flows, as does life, as does myth. And you realize, as you pause to watch a drop fall, that Babylon has turned the simplest act of letting water fall into an allegory for existence itself. The night air is cool, the stars above faint but present, and the soft plink of water echoes against stone. It's mesmerizing, almost meditative, as though each drop carries both a tick of the hour and a whisper of eternity. You feel, perhaps for the first time, how the Babylonians could view time not just as a tool but as a story, a rhythm, a living presence in the city around them. You step out of the temple shadows and follow the roads leading toward the city gates, where traders bustle and caravans begin to stir even in the late evening. Merchants are loading goods, counting silver, and shouting prices to one another, and you notice something that makes you smile. Small clay bowls are being carried alongside baskets of grain, jars of oil, and rolls of textiles. The water clock isn't just sacred or domestic anymore, it's becoming a portable, practical tool for commerce. Picture a merchant pacing in a dusty courtyard, dripping water marking the passage of time as he negotiates the sale of a camel. Each drop measures the interval he allows a customer to respond. The rhythm of water, once confined to palaces and temples, now guides the flow of trade and bargaining. Timing matters here, too. If you speak too long or wait too long, the deal may vanish. Mainstream fact: water clocks were known to accompany merchants, especially in situations requiring strict timing or fairness, like auctions or contracts. By standardizing intervals with a clepsydra, traders could ensure agreements weren't subject to bias or guesswork, adding credibility to transactions across distances. Quirky tidbit: some Babylonian merchants reportedly decorated their portable water clocks with humorous or playful images, perhaps tiny animals or exaggerated faces, to amuse themselves during long waits. Imagine haggling for a jug of dates while watching a tiny carved cat supervise your patience. It's multitasking with whimsy. Historians still argue how widespread these portable devices actually were. Did most traveling merchants carry them, or were they a rarity reserved for wealthy traders dealing in high-value commodities? The evidence is spotty, so scholars debate endlessly. You can almost picture them arguing over fragments of pottery like they're arguing over an eBay listing. You continue down the cobbled road, observing a caravan guard who times his rounds with a small dripping bowl, marking when it's his turn to check the pack animals. Elsewhere, a merchant's apprentice watches a bowl to signal when a contract should be signed. You can see how this simple tool spreads slowly but surely from elite institutions into everyday commerce, changing the way people interact and conduct business. Imagine the ripple effect. A water clock allows multiple merchants in a crowded market to coordinate, reducing disputes. They don't need a priest or palace decree to determine fairness. They simply rely on time itself, dripping predictably from clay. It's small, simple, and incredibly clever. And yet, there are human quirks. You notice a young trader tilting his bowl slightly, hoping to gain an extra moment in negotiation. Another apprentice wipes the hole, inadvertently speeding up the drip. Despite human interference, the concept sticks, spreading like a gentle revolution across Mesopotamia. The innovation travels beyond Babylon too. Traders move along river routes and desert tracks, carrying both goods and ideas. As the dripping bowls leave the city, they inspire adaptations in neighboring regions, influencing Egyptian and later Greek and Roman approaches to measuring time. What started as a temple and palace invention becomes a shared tool for daily life and commerce, a subtle but transformative export. By the time you reach the outer city walls, the night is deep, the torches flicker along ramparts, and you see a caravan setting off into the desert. A small bowl rests in the leader's pack, quietly dripping. You realize that this simple, fragile tool is not just tracking hours, it's shaping economies, lives, and even the way cultures think about order and fairness. Babylon's water clocks have left the city, and with them, a ripple of civilization stretches outward. You leave the city gates behind and follow the winding riverbanks, where reeds whisper in the night breeze and the soft gurgle of the Euphrates reminds you of the omnipresent water. Here, far from temples, palaces, and bustling markets, the water clock takes on a more experimental role. Ingenious minds, sometimes apprentices, sometimes bored scholars, start tinkering, testing new shapes, new holes, and new methods of measuring the unpredictable flow of time. You pause by a low terrace overlooking the river. A figure kneels beside a shallow basin, carefully adjusting a reed to alter the size of the hole. Another nearby watches the water rise instead of fall, marking the levels on a stick. It's a laboratory of trial and error, a nocturnal workshop illuminated only by moonlight and a small oil lamp. These experiments feel playful yet purposeful, the kind of curiosity that drives civilization forward without anyone announcing it to the world. Mainstream fact: Babylonian innovations in water clocks included both inflow and outflow designs. Inflow clepsydras measured rising water in a marked container, while outflow versions monitored drainage from a vessel. Each type allowed for different approaches to timekeeping, revealing early engineering sophistication. Quirky tidbit: some of these experimental bowls were inscribed with jokes, tiny sketches, or personal notes, like "Don't spill me again" or "Foolproof." Not today. It's as if the inventors understood that time, like humor, is often unpredictable, and leaving a human trace made the work more relatable. Historians still argue how standardized these experimental techniques were. Did scribes carefully note every ratio and hole diameter, or were these largely personal experiments that varied wildly in accuracy? Some evidence suggests both, disciplined scholars working alongside hobbyists and apprentices, blurring the line between science and playful tinkering. You watch an apprentice tip one bowl over by mistake, drenching his robes. The teacher sighs, chuckling softly. Even time has a sense of humor. This mix of frustration and amusement underscores a truth about early timekeeping. It's delicate, labor-intensive, and entirely dependent on human attention. Even minor miscalculations can cascade into missed rituals, delayed markets, or ruined bread. Walking along the riverbank, you notice how the steady sound of dripping water contrasts with the flowing river. One is controlled, predictable, harnessed in clay. The other is wild, untamed, and infinite. The juxtaposition is almost poetic. The Babylonians were learning to impose structure on chaos without mistaking control for absolute power. Some experiments aim to improve accuracy for night watches or astronomical observations. Others are for practical jokes, personal projects, or even teaching children about measurement. A curious boy dips his finger in the flowing water, counting drops aloud as if he's reciting a nursery rhyme. The act is simple, but it embodies the same principles driving observatories, courts, and markets. By the river, you sense a quiet revolution. Water clocks are evolving, stretching beyond ritual into science, everyday life, and even play. Every drip, every adjustment, every playful scribble on clay contributes to a growing understanding of time as something humans can measure, manipulate, and integrate into society. As you trace the river's edge under the starlit sky, you feel the flow of knowledge itself, moving steadily outward. The water clocks, fragile as they are, become a metaphor. Humans harnessing the natural world to understand their place within it, bridging chaos and order, the mundane and the divine, night and day. The rhythm of Babylon now exists not just in temples or courts, but in the very act of curiosity, in the quiet, relentless drip of discovery. You follow the river farther, the current reflecting moonlight like scattered silver coins, and you notice small villages beginning to emerge along the banks. Here, the water clock has taken on an entirely new role. It isn't just a priestly tool or a palace gadget, it is now an essential part of rural life. Farmers, bakers, and millers adopt it to organize their days, and in some cases, to settle disputes over shared irrigation systems. Imagine a small field divided between two families. They need to rotate water from a single canal. A clay bowl, carefully marked with lines, measures the flow for each family. When the water reaches a certain mark, the next family takes their turn. No priest, no king, no decree, just clay, water, and trust. This simple mechanism solves a problem that could have led to years of friction. Mainstream fact: Babylonian irrigation relied heavily on timed rotations, and some evidence suggests that water clocks were used to standardize these schedules, ensuring fair access to limited resources. In a society dependent on agriculture, fair timing was literally a matter of survival. A quirky tidbit: some villages reportedly personalized their clepsydras with doodles of crops, farm animals, or even caricatures of neighbors. It's as if the clock were not only functional but also a canvas for storytelling, humor, and subtle social commentary. You can imagine a farmer muttering, "If this goat eats the markings, my turn's ruined." Historians still argue how precise these rural clocks could be. The bowls were small, fragile, and prone to clogging or evaporation. Did villagers rely on them consistently, or were they a rough guideline supplemented by experience and observation? Evidence is sparse, leaving room for lively debate about the interplay between technology and practical know-how. You walk past a family gathering at twilight. Children splash in a small basin, learning the flow of water while unintentionally absorbing the concept of time. Parents call them back, using the dripping bowl as a signal. When the last drop falls, wash up for supper. You realize that the water clock also becomes a teaching tool, a way for the young to internalize patterns, sequences, and the discipline of timed tasks. Back in the fields, you see a miller timing the turning of his grinding wheels with a small clepsydra. He checks the water level, makes slight adjustments to the hole size, and mutters numbers to himself. Each drop represents a fraction of his labor, a metric that blends manual effort with abstract measurement. Without such tools, work would have been less predictable, and planning across families or villages far more challenging. The soundscape is mesmerizing: flowing river, occasional animal calls, wind through reeds, and the gentle, steady plink of clay. Even in remote areas, the rhythm of Babylon pulses. It is not only sacred or administrative now, it is woven into everyday survival and social cooperation. There's humor here too. A neighbor complains that his hour lasted too short, blaming the wind, the goat, or the mischievous apprentice adjusting the bowl. Yet everyone smiles because the solution is simple: refill, recalibrate, continue. The bowls are fallible, human-adapted, and enduring, much like civilization itself. Walking along the village paths, you notice how far-reaching this innovation has become. From temple rituals to palace courts, from markets to riverside fields, the water clock has unified disparate facets of life. It is a heartbeat, audible and visible, tying together the divine, the political, the practical, and the playful. In every drop lies the ambition of humans to organize, understand, and ultimately master time, even if just enough to keep life flowing smoothly. As dawn begins to soften the horizon, you climb a low hill overlooking Babylon. From this vantage, the city stretches like a living mosaic: temples, homes, workshops, and fields all connected by canals glinting in early light. And everywhere, if you look closely, water clocks tick softly in bowls and basins, weaving a network of measured hours across the cityscape. You feel the pulse of civilization itself, organized in tiny drips, a rhythm as steady as the river winding through it all. You notice priests atop the ziggurat aligning their clepsydras with the rising sun, astronomers recalibrating their bowls for the next night of observation, and merchants adjusting portable water clocks before the market opens. The devices have become indispensable for synchronizing the city, a primitive yet surprisingly effective way to coordinate complex urban life. Even ordinary households have adapted them: a mother timing bread, a scribe counting hours of study, a fisherman calculating how long to wait before nets are checked. Mainstream fact: by the first millennium BCE, Babylonian water clocks had become increasingly sophisticated, with markings dividing the bowl into 12 or more intervals, giving a clearer structure to day and night. This standardization laid the groundwork for the 12-hour system that persists in some form even today. Quirky tidbit: some clepsydras were shaped like animals, lions, owls, or frogs, adding personality to timekeeping. Some bowls even had small decorative spouts to create pleasing splashes, transforming mere measurement into sensory delight. Imagine using a clock that not only tells you time but serenades you like a miniature fountain. Historians still argue exactly how consistent these innovations were across social classes. Did only temples, palaces, and wealthy households benefit from advanced water clocks, or were simpler versions truly widespread among common citizens? Fragmentary evidence makes the answer murky, leaving room for speculation. You stroll past a courtyard where apprentices are refilling their bowls and recalibrating holes, whispering numbers to one another. Mistakes abound: a bowl drips too fast, another too slow. One apprentice accidentally tilts the vessel, sending a small arc of water across the floor. The teacher sighs and mutters, "Time has a mind of its own." You smile, realizing that even in a civilization obsessed with order, humans and water remain unpredictable. The city itself feels alive with rhythm. Drips echo through streets, courtyards, and temples, blending with distant voices, clanging tools, and the murmur of flowing canals. Babylon's water clocks have become a unifying force, coordinating sacred rites, commerce, domestic chores, and scholarly observation. Each drop, imperceptible on its own, contributes to the heartbeat of the city. And yet, there's poetry in the imperfection. A wind gusts, a bird knocks a bowl, a crack slows the flow. Time, though measured, retains its unpredictability. The Babylonians understood this instinctively. Control is never absolute, but the attempt to structure life with dripping water is a triumph nonetheless. As the sun rises higher, the city awakens fully, each droplet in a clay bowl carrying lessons, labor, and devotion. From the humblest household to the grandest ziggurat, water clocks have transformed Babylon. They have made time tangible, audible, and communal. Watching the city from your hill, you grasp the full scope of the innovation. A simple bowl, a tiny hole, and the relentless passage of water have reshaped civilization, one drip at a time. By mid-morning, the city is alive with motion. Merchants shout their prices, priests conduct ceremonies, and children dart between alleys, trying to steal a splash from someone's water clock. You follow the steady plink of bowls as they echo through homes, courtyards, and workshops. Babylon hums with measured time, and the water clock, fragile, simple, and ingenious, sits at the heart of it all. You wander into a courtyard where a family demonstrates the domestic versatility of the invention. A mother times bread baking, a father times the weaving of reeds, a child times the length of a nap. Each bowl becomes a tool, a tutor, and a tiny ritual in daily life. Watching them, you realize that the water clock is not only a measure of time, it is a teacher, instilling rhythm, patience, and attention in a society gradually learning to value measured hours. Mainstream fact: the influence of Babylonian water clocks spread far beyond Mesopotamia. They inspired Egyptian, Greek, and later Roman innovations, eventually informing mechanical timekeeping centuries later. The concept of dividing night and day into units, first made visible through dripping water, became a foundation for calendars, astronomy, and even modern watches. Quirky tidbit: some Babylonian clepsydras were designed with multiple chambers or interconnected bowls to measure longer intervals, almost like a precursor to modern hourglasses or multistage timers. Imagine watching water leap from one vessel to another in a small domestic symphony, functional yet oddly theatrical. Historians still argue how standardized these measurements were across the city. Did every household, every scribe, and every workshop maintain consistent time, or was variation inevitable? The surviving fragments suggest a mix, some perfectly calibrated, others wildly irregular, but the concept's adoption is undeniable. You trace the dripping bowls from temple, palace, and market to humble homes and riverside villages. Each drop carries the same principles: order, measurement, and rhythm. In temples, the water guides rituals; in courts, it enforces fairness; in marketplaces, it mediates trade; in homes, it structures daily life. The city's pulse has become audible, tangible, and inseparable from human activity. There is humor in its imperfections, too. A bowl leaks, a child tips it, a goat nudges it, and the rhythm falters, but life continues. The Babylonians, ever pragmatic, simply refill, recalibrate, and carry on. Time may be slipping, but civilization endures, one drop at a time. As you stand and look over the city, it feels alive in a new way. The water clocks have done more than tell hours; they have orchestrated life, connecting divine observance, commerce, domesticity, and curiosity. They are silent teachers, playful companions, and tireless overseers, guiding a city toward a new understanding of order. The sun rises higher, illuminating canals, ziggurats, and bustling streets. And in each courtyard, temple, and workshop, the tiny drip of water carries its lesson: that time is not merely observed, but shaped, harnessed, and woven into the very fabric of civilization. Babylon has not just survived, it has learned to measure itself, to live by its own heartbeat, drop by drop. The city begins to settle as the day stretches on, though life never truly pauses. You sit quietly on a terrace overlooking the Euphrates, feeling the warmth of the sun on your skin and the faint breeze stirring the reeds. In your mind, you can still hear the gentle plink of water from countless bowls, a symphony of measured moments that has orchestrated the lives of thousands. Each drop has played its part, from temple rituals to bustling marketplaces, from domestic chores to starlit observations, tying the rhythms of Babylon into a seamless, living pattern. It's a comforting thought, realizing that something so simple, a bowl, a pinhole, water, can hold such immense power over a city, its people, and even the heavens above. Time, once elusive and abstract, becomes tangible in its drip. You imagine the priests, scribes, artisans, and children, all pausing, listening, and watching, caught in the quiet magic of an invention that made life predictable, structured, and meaningful. The imperfections are part of the charm, too. Bowls leak, apprentices miscalculate, wind or goats interfere. Yet, in those imperfections, life continues. The Babylonians understood that while control over time is limited, patience and observation allow us to align with it, to move alongside its flow rather than constantly fight it. You let the sound of water dripping in your imagination lull you, each drop a gentle reminder of rhythm, resilience, and the human capacity to impose order on chaos. Take a deep breath. Feel the calm, the gentle pulse of history, the steady heartbeat of civilization itself. Let your mind drift with the water, imagining the city of Babylon, alive with rhythm, ingenuity, and quiet triumph. The world may rush and roar beyond these thoughts, but here, in this soft, meditative space, time moves slowly, perfectly measured, and entirely yours.